Five, four, three, two, one. We are live on the Noah Donohoe case. And today I've got with me Donal, who is currently writing the Noah Donohoe case, a persecution, not a prosecution. So he is the expert on this. Thank you very much for coming on, Donal. Can you just give the people a bit of background on, how you came to this case and how you became an expert in it and what led you into this genre?
Yes, Sean, but first of all, I would say that I'm not the family spokesperson or their solicitor. I would always point that out. I mean, I am just a commentator and writer in terms of this, but it's not my day job as a writer. I mean, I actually work in the financial sector, but when I was convalescing from surgery, major surgery, relatives came in to the family home and stated that they were going out to search for Noah Donohoe. And I basically asked them right away, who? And that's sort of what started it off, because the entire community then started to go out and search after the 21st of June. Basically that the statutory services were stretched for resources and personnel because of the pandemic. So everyone started to go out and look for this young man who was declared missing. And his body had been found in a storm drain on the 27th of the 6th, 2020, tragically. And I think that, I know they say that if the child is not found after 48 hours, the likelihood is that they're not alive. There were certain peculiarities that happened during the search that were very, very unusual, and we'll go into those. But it was really, once I seen the photos of Noah, especially with his mother, I had previously written about subjects that it involved the welfare of children. For example, the Kincora Boys Home scandal. For many years, I've been writing about that. Myself and Lyra McKee had been in contact about that prior to Lyra's murder. And I mean, it had always struck me, anywhere where there was a case of injustice, I think that that sort of quirked my attention towards it. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just knowing how the system operates inherently. I think that if you're on the autistic spectrum, you feel anyway as though that there is, in a way, a state of neurotypical apartheid, and that you empathize with people who don't fit into the conventional groups that run society.
And it's such a tragedy, isn't it? Could you just tell the viewers then, perhaps some of them aren't familiar of who Noah is. Could you just give us his background and let us know,
Yeah, Noah was a 14-year-old Irish Catholic schoolboy of mixed race who lived in South Belfast with his mother, Fiona. He went to a school called St Malachy's College, which is basically the finishing school for future Irish cabinet ministers. He went there, and that is based in North Belfast. He was someone who essentially aspired to become a doctor, and had an interest in things like cycling. Very, very promising young man. And tragically, that has been taken away from both the family and society.
What happened on the day in question?
I remember seeing it on the news, that essentially that he had been declared missing, and I'd seen the photographs and so forth, and there have been cases where people have been declared missing before and found. I mean, I have to say that. But I'm of a generation, and I've said this before, where I was actually, I think, the exact same age as Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, who died tragically during the Soham murders case. And I remember in school, we were told to write letters of support and sympathy to those families. So really, it was a question that you started thinking, is this really history repeating itself? And I think there was just a huge community response and reaction to it. particularly, like I said, when they seen the photographs of his magnetic evanescent smile and next to his mum, and essentially people realized during the pandemic that the police were never going to do this by themselves. There was going to have to be a popular sort of on the ground response from ordinary men and women and young people to take matters into their own hands lawfully in an attempt to find Noah.
So I read this article, I think it was in the Irish Times, about the computer. The computer was found and they arrested somebody, but then they said that that person had nothing to do with his disappearance. What do you take of that?
Yes, the person you're referring to, because there are no reporting restrictions on it, is a man by the name of Darrell Paul. Now, don't take this as gospel, but what I will say is that it could be correct that he may not have had anything to do with Noah's actual death. But what I will say, and which is particularly grotesque, is that he had possession of Noah's belongings and was trying to sell them during a statewide search where every single person here knew that that was going on. Everyone knew the name of the young man who was missing. And he had Noah's school books with Noah's name on them and the insignia of the school. So, I mean, for him to turn around and say, or for anyone representing him to turn around and say that he in any way was ignorant as to what was going on, that's bogus. I mean, and the judge certainly didn't accept that. And that's why reporting restrictions were permitted. What I will say about him is that the police were tipped off about him anonymously during the search, and they didn't act on it for 2 days. So they went for 2 days, allowing everyone to go out and search for his belongings. And I don't believe them actually told the family, but essentially they misled people into thinking that, these things were still out there to be found as such, whenever actually they had been correctly tipped off that he was in possession of them, and he himself was living in North Belfast. And this is a known criminal.
Yeah, in Arizona, he would have been charged with conspiracy to murder and be facing the death penalty, probably.
Well, I don't believe in the death penalty. I think in a way, it sort of lets people like that off a bit too easily. I think that he essentially someone who is a petty criminal, but at this point, really, nobody could rule out any wider involvement in Noah's death. I mean, I'm not saying that he has a hand in that. That's really for the authorities to determine. But what I will say is that no one could really plead ignorance and ask for clemency regarding the issue of not knowing that Noah was missing and also being in possession of his belongings.
Yeah, I don't believe in the death penalty either. My lawyer got Ray Crone, the snaggletooth killer, off death row, and the cops had tried to set him up, and the prosecutor knew and suppressed the DNA to show that he was innocent. And what you see is most of the guys on death row are indigent or black guys. They'll get a black guy, give him 5,000 to defend himself, spend millions showing he's guilty. And then the governor of the state will fry him in the electric chair just before the election to show that he's tough on crime to get more votes. That's how it works out there.
Well, it's funny you say that in that my grandmother, my late grandmother, and I, we always used to have a debate about whether Myra Hindley and Ian Brady should have got the death penalty. And one of the things I said to her that kind of made her, well, I think she was a bit taken back by it, was the fact that that is what Ian Brady wanted. Myra Hindley didn't want that. I mean, she wanted parole, badly wanted parole, and she gaslighted many people and misled them to try and campaign for her. But I think it would be too easy, in a sense, for some of them just to get that, although there is an enormous cost involved in keeping them in prison. One of the detectives involved in that particular case, John Stalker, who was actually sent here to investigate police before for murder in Greater Manchester Police, he stated that while he did not believe in the death penalty, he would have actually, in that particular instance of the Murs murders, he would have found it appropriate.
So we brought up the theme of police corruption. How much did that permeate Noah's case?
Well, because it's ongoing, that's something that, the conclusion is still to be drawn, and not the jury's out. But what I will say is that the two known facts about, in terms of how they did mislead the public, well, they misled them and they failed to act in terms of the tip-off. There was one thing. One second thing was the fact that they lied and told people that they had conducted a leaflet drop in the area. That was found to be false whenever I believe it was reported that Noah's next of kin, his mother, had requested a copy of the leaflet and they had refused, and then actually told people, put it down to a misunderstanding, and stated that there had been no leaflet drop. They did the same thing. They stated that there had been a community consultation. That hadn't occurred. Again, they had to go with their tail between their legs and state that it hadn't. In terms of police corruption, there were all sorts of allegations surrounding it. I mean, this is a part of what is termed the United Kingdom. Actually, it's a part of Ireland, but I mean, currently under the UK jurisdiction, we were partitioned by force of arms. But essentially, the statelet here of Northern Ireland, so to speak, is renowned for police corruption by way of not just, small things like, for example, issues to do with penalty points and so forth. I'm on about things like murder, perverting the course of justice, police officers who have come forward, who have admitted on trial that they were instructed to lie. In very high-profile cases where people were shot to death, who were unarmed and did not exchange any sort of struggle or fire with police.
Wow. So I also raised racism, and Noah was mixed race. Do the police believe it was a racially motivated attack?
That's interesting, because the thing is, there was an attack on a young man called Flynn Maguire, who is of an Irish Catholic background and went to the same school as Noah, I believe, in the same sort of vicinity. And that was treated as a hate crime. Very, very striking parallels, in the sense that he was on his bicycle, he was knocked off it by a group, including an adult, of youths who essentially slashed his head. He ran with blood pouring out of it. None of the cars would stop to help him, into an area which is heavily loyalist, heavily right-wing, and eventually made it, thankfully, to a family member, a family friend's home, to safety. But that has been treated as a hate crime. The case of Noah is not. And the police keep repeating the assertion that essentially they will take their directive from the coroner. One of the things that I'm going to tell you about a case with striking parallels to Noah that has actually happened in England. And I think maybe it highlights some of the difficulties that people can have when it comes to inquests. But no, it certainly did. Just to definitively answer the question, no, it's not been treated as a hate crime.
What's this other case in England?
The case that's strikingly similar to Noah is that of a young girl, a 12-year-old girl who was a refugee from Somalia. Her name was Shukri Abdi in Lancashire, where she went out to play, and there were a group of youths who threatened to kill her if she did not get into a river. And the young girl stated that she couldn't swim and that she didn't feel comfortable doing that. And they threatened her with violence if she didn't. So she got into the river and she drowned. The family took it before an inquest and stated that throughout they weren't even provided with a proper interpreter, which the coroner acknowledged. The coroner did not find any blame of a criminal nature regarding the youths who were with her. Some of the parallels with Noah is that she also, like Noah, wanted to be a doctor. She was from a minority background. There have been allegations of racism. And essentially the failure to properly keep the family informed throughout the entire process. So there's been misinformation, disinformation, and a lack of information.
So in the news a lot with Ireland are religious conflicts. And someone's just put in the live chat here, and you might want to respond to this. Sean, he's making it sectarian. Can you just give people an idea of the religious tensions that may have surrounded this case, and feel free to respond to this person who said he's making it sectarian?
That person's stating that I'm making it sectarian, when actually there are well-known people within the loyalist community, including those who hold political office, who have come forward and commented and speculated on this case in various ways. And I would argue that actually they're the ones who've politicized it. I'm just responding to the fact that they have. In terms of the issue of sectarianism, the area in question is renowned for loyalism, for extreme right-wing sentiments, for hate crimes, for people who have been involved in paramilitary organizations. Bonfires take place year after year after year, where there are racial and cultural ethics that are destroyed. The idea that there may not be any sort of sectarian element to this, I find that quite bogus, because actually a lot of the abuse that I have received has come from loyalists. And really you have to question, if there is no element of that to it, then what have they got to hide?
Are you in fear of your life, or do you have death threats? I know things can get crazy, emotions run high around situations like this. What's the state with you? And are you under threats from people?
Yes, the police are currently looking into one particular case. I know they say that you shouldn't really talk too much about those things, but the problem with this was that there was a name to it. It wasn't a faceless, nameless girl, so to speak, on the internet. And as a result of their activity, there was a huge amount of harassment and intimidation. There were threats that there would be attacks on my home and so forth. In terms of what you mentioned about, am I afraid of anything really? Not really, in the sense that I think there are worse things in life than death. I mean, there is such a thing as evil. And I think probably something that would be more scary is the prospect of any other family having to go through this.
So when I get attacked about things, it makes me think that I'm doing the right thing, and it motivates me to have even more energy to create that content. Do you recognize that kind of motivation within yourself?
Well, Sean, there were times when writing this when I actually, I had material relating to it. I had all the documentation and information in front of me, and I was sitting up late at night collating things together, because the book is finished. It will be out soon. But essentially, there were times when I was ready to throw the laptop against the wall and say, I don't want anything more to do with this. It's causing too much strain and stress. But whenever I kept looking at the photos of Noah, I mean, there seemed to be something in his eyes, his smile, and also the photos of him with his mother. You kind of wouldn't wish that on anyone. They've still been left in limbo. I mean, I think they've an excellent solicitor. I really do. I mean, and he deals with these sort of things day in, day out. So, I mean, he is someone who I personally would have instructed on the matter if it had happened to me or my family. But at the end of the day, I think that there has to be a wider public awareness of these issues, because it could very well happen again. It has happened before.
Writing the book, what surprised you the most?
Well, if you asked me, out of all the things that I have written about, prior to this, I would have said to you that the worst thing was that of the Kincora Boys Home, as I mentioned, particularly having to go through the witness statements and so forth of what went on there. But I have to say, this was probably about 20 times worse. And the thing is, I think what was so difficult is that, this is still very much an emotive live issue. It is something which has caused an awful lot of distrust in society here. I think what surprised me the most out of it all was probably just the overall police handling of the operation. I felt that there were many things that they could have done that would have been better. I'll give you an example, right? The police work hand in hand here with the police in Southern Ireland to locate the remains of people who are classed as the disappeared, namely victims of the conflict here who were buried maybe across the Irish border. And one of the things that I felt that they could have done and could have requested the help of a government minister to do was essentially to submit an intervention for the police in Southern Ireland, who are experts in that area, to come up and assist in the search and rescue operation of someone who has disappeared in such horrendous circumstances during the pandemic. What we do know is that it was police officers, the specialist expert personnel. They came primarily from a city called Derry, which is predominantly Irish Catholic nationalist. So, I don't know their identities, so to speak, because the police wouldn't give that sort of information out. But I think just ultimately the family spokesperson at the time stated that there were more questions than answers, particularly with the post-mortem. I think that is pretty shocking.
What could the authorities do from here to make amends?
Do you have all day? Well, so let's speak hypothetically, right? Assuming the family were to hypothetically exhaust all legal options, right, including the inquest, including, say, for example, a potential judicial review, and they still were not to get anywhere. One of the things they would have the option to do, because it has happened here and it has happened in Southern Ireland, is that if the Justice Committee here were to set up a committee of inquiry in relation to ongoing sectarian attacks on youths in Belfast, and were to subpoena witnesses and those within the community to give evidence under oath, it would mean that those people would be compelled to answer truthfully or would be prosecuted for perjury. And there is actually a live case of that going on here against a known royalist. I'm not going to disclose or get into that because it is live, but that's something that I'll give you an example. There in Southern Ireland, back in 2013, 2014, there was a similar such committee and a disclosures tribunal set up by the Irish Parliament into police corruption by way of what was known as the penalty point scandal, where basically any penalty points incurred by well-known prominent people were being simply written off by their contacts within the police. The allegations did not surface through the media. They surfaced from two known people within the actual police themselves, including the nephew of a former deputy prime minister. Is Sergeant Maurice McCabe and Garda John Wilson. They made the allegations. Two members of the Oireachtas, they were called before a committee of inquiry. They gave their evidence, and ultimately, at first, the Garda Commissioner, using parliamentary privilege, knowing that he couldn't be sued for defamation, he tried to libel one of them as a child molester, which was absolutely baseless and without foundation. That was Maurice McCabe. He tried to label him it, but the ultimate result of that whole issue was the resignation of two police commissioners in the south of Ireland. It also brought down the Minister for Justice. It brought down the Deputy Prime Minister. Wow. And it resulted in a radical shake-up of things whereby they had to actually bring in an outsider who was not from that particular police force, and essentially they installed him in the role of what's called, in Irish it's termed the Garda Commissioner, which is basically like a chief constable type figure. But what that showed, that particular scandal, and this is pertinent, Sean, is that the Garda had actually bugged and spied on the offices of the ombudsman that was supposed to regulate them. That came from within the police as an institution. It didn't come from the public or the media.
It's like the CIA investigating itself for cocaine trafficking.
Well, I mean, everybody knows that the CIA and the FBI have bugged each other.
So, from the viewers, you got a question from Wendy Palmer. Why was Noah found naked?
In terms of answering that, it's something that you would really need. I think we really need to await the result of the inquest in that. And I'm not evading the question. It's just the CCTV footage has proven inconclusive. So, that's kind of a loaded question, because for me to answer that, it might be considered speculation, and the coroner has ordered the prosecution of anyone who is speculating. So I need to be careful in terms of answering that. What I will say is that when the result comes out of the inquest, everyone's going to have an analysis of it and they're going to have a view on it. But it was an area that he was completely unfamiliar with. And I think the issue of Daryl Paul, I think the fact that he had some of his belongings and the rest of them, one of the problems that has emerged in all of this was that there was a disclosure by Noah's mother on social media, and I have a record of it, and I've mentioned this, that I've written about it, whereby she stated that at the inquest, one of the witnesses stated that Noah's jacket was seen at a wall next to the storm drain in Northwood Road. But the person who gave the police the accurate anonymous tip-off stated that Daryl Paul was in possession of all his belongings, including that jacket. The police have yet to locate that.
Another question has come in. Do you think Noah was drugged?
No, I don't. No. There's no evidence to suggest that. No, I mean, let me just dismiss that. If Noah had been taking drugs or alcohol, how could he have cycled so coherently, energetically and athletically from South Belfast over to North Belfast with the CCTV showing that? The journey was intact for the most, until he reached the interface area. So I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be able to cycle in those circumstances.
Let's compare this with the Madeleine McCann case then and look at the amount of resources and the political action taken. Do you think there was a particular absence of that in Noah's case?
Absolutely. I'll give you a better example. Compare it with the issue of the Soham case. I mean, there were 400 officers deployed in that on a full-time basis, including from Scotland Yard.
Wow.
There was a widespread campaign of resources put in by the community. Every known sex offender within that particular, I think there were over 200 of them that were questioned at the time. And certainly all of the high-risk sex offenders in England were questioned about it. And that was that. I mean, that was back then. Technology was more primitive then.
So when is your book going to be available for people?
Early within the new year.
Let me see if the viewers have got any more questions. And where can people find you online?
Facebook. With Twitter, I've been very careful not to use Twitter. Twitter is one of the libel capitals of the world. And yes, you find that there are a lot of cases. Northern Ireland is a place whereby it's renowned for legal tourism because the libel and defamation laws are draconian here, Sean. And there were lots of things which I would have loved to have been able to include in the book, but I couldn't because of that reason.
Are you okay to email me over all of your hyperlinks then? Because this video will go out. It'll probably get some views in the next couple of days, and people want to contact you. And,
yes, you know,
right. I know I've got your website in one of my emails. And if anyone is watching this, please put your question in the live chat right now. Let's see if anyone's put anything in there. The role of the Catholic Church in this, someone's asked.
I'm not really sure there is a huge role in terms of it, in the sense that, I mean, the only real role that I know of is essentially the fact that they did facilitate the funeral service, but I don't really know where that's going. I don't know whether, I could more or less guess the community background of whoever wrote that one.
Corey has asked, do you believe that any group or groups are behind the foul play?
That would be speculating.
That would be speculating.
And remember, the inquest is ongoing, so I mean, I can't answer that. In that, if I were to state that, I mean, Sean, a lot of these people that are submitting these questions are trying to get me to do something which they can then ring the police and have me prosecuted for. I'm not going to do it.
Try and trip you up.
I'm not going to give them what they want.
Perhaps this is a safer one then, from Big Zamora. Has him being seen fallen off his bike mentioned?
Has it been mentioned in the book?
The person has not specified. Are you able to expand on him being seen falling off his bike?
It certainly has been mentioned in the book, but what essentially has been noted is that the CCTV footage has been proven to be inconclusive, and no warrants have been submitted for in excess of 100 CCTV cameras that were available.
So someone's asked about the computer. We've already covered that. Here's another one from Decay Official. What about the fresh locks on the storm drain after they had searched for no avail the previous day?
That's a very interesting question. And what I'll say is that before Noah even went missing, when Noah was alive, the Department of Infrastructure, which is the government department that deals with it, they knew, essentially, they had searched and assessed this facility on the 18th of June. Noah didn't go missing, as in Noah was alive right up until the 21st of June. So even during the search, there was another assessment of that storm drain facility on the 24th of June by the same government department. So within that short space of time, there have been 2 assessments by them. And are they seriously telling me that no one would have picked up on this? No one would have noticed anything suspicious by, employees of the government and so forth in the facilitation of that, of a risk assessment, of it being hazardous? And also, there were locals who stated that they allowed their children to play around that storm drain facility. I wouldn't allow my child to play around a storm drain facility that I find to be hazardous.
Just looking at the questions, we've already answered about racism, and someone's asked, what story did the guy with the laptop give?
Well, that's ongoing in terms of the actual proceedings against him. I understand that he has actually experienced quite a lot of intimidation, threats, and abuse in custody. But the problem is he was a known criminal. And so essentially, there was a whole issue of the fact that I think he was in custody when the police actually came to search his apartment, or his home. And in terms of the provision of the story, he is basically stating, as far as I know, and from what the local media have reported, that he just came across this by random. And even though, in all reality, Sean, it's a bit implausible, because if he had found Noah's rucksack and inside it there were school books with his name, with his school insignia and so forth on them, and you knew that there was a statewide search for a missing person by the name of Noah Donohoe, are you seriously saying that you wouldn't come forward and contact the police yourself and say, look, I found this, here you go, can you please notify the family?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we have finished with the questions then. If anyone else has got a question for Donal, I'm going to urge you to go down the description box and click on his links and look out for the arrival of his book. I'm going to be excited to download that on my Kindle.
What I'll say is that hopefully once I do publish, once we go ahead with the publication, I will come on and speak to you again afterwards, and you can question me on aspects of the book that you find to be interesting. But I went through plenty of precedents. This book is very, very well documented. Anyone can sue anyone. I could sue you tomorrow. Does it mean I'm going to win? No. Will they win on this book? Never. So essentially, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I hope everybody enjoys their Christmas pudding, because there's going to be plenty more in the new year.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on, Donal, and I wish you much luck and perseverance in your mission. Cheers. Take care.